Hey everyone, just wanted to say that this video is meant to start a discussion about healers in Genshin. I'm certainly not an expert on all things game design, but I wanted to give my thoughts on the issues that we're seeing. Also, just gonna put it out there, I did pull for Kokomi and I enjoy using her, but I still have my gripes with her design as a healer. So with that out of the way, let's get into the video. The release of Kokomi Sangonomiya has been quite the controversy for the Genshin community, to say the least. Almost everywhere you look, you will find comments about how bad she is as a character. Now, it might seem like the haters have dramatized this issue and blown it out of proportion, and to some extent I agree that the outrage is a bit much.
Hold up, wait a minute, something ain't right.
And as a support and healer main across many different games, I really do want to defend Kokomi, but unfortunately I simply can't find any good argument because for me at least, I believe it boils down to just really poor game design. More specifically, poor game design when it comes to healers. And I want to be clear, this problem doesn't only affect Kokomi, there's other characters like Barbara, Chi-Chi, and Noelle that suffer from this. But on the flip side, MiHoYo has shown us that they are capable of creating excellent healers as well, examples being Jean, Bennett, and Diona, all of which are in a league of their own. But it's this stark divide between the good healers and bad healers that really frustrates me. So why is this the case, and what exactly causes this divide between the healers in Genshin? Well, to really understand this issue, we have to look at the history of video games and the origins of character archetypes in gaming. The idea of character archetypes goes all the way back to tabletop games and the early MMOs that were released back in the day. Even if you haven't had much experience with these type of games, you've likely heard of these archetypes. And here they are as follows: the DPS, the tank, and the healer, aka the Holy Trinity of gaming. The idea behind the Holy Trinity is to create role specialization that requires players to work cooperatively to accomplish a goal, typically killing a monster or a boss. The role of the tank is to aggro the enemies and intercept damage. The role of the DPS is to deal as much damage as possible to bring down the enemies. And lastly, there's the healer, whose role is to keep everyone alive during the battle. And in general, the Holy Trinity has become pervasive throughout gaming. It's so common to the point that you can find these archetypes in games like first-person shooters like Overwatch and MOBAs like League of Legends. Despite the longevity of this model in video games, I would argue that we're seeing variations in this model with the introduction of utility classes. Now, this archetype isn't super easy to define, but generally speaking, these are characters that provide use to the team outside of tanking, healing, and damage. Some examples of their abilities include buffing allies, debuffing enemies, area of denial, crowd control, and shielding. A good example of a utility character is Lulu from League of Legends. In a traditional sense, she's not useful because she doesn't deal much damage, she can't heal that well, and she most definitely cannot tank. However, her utility and usefulness comes from her ability to disrupt enemies and buff her allies. She's so good at doing this that she's generally remained a top tier character in League. So you're probably thinking that's good and all, but what does that have to do with the traditional Trinity? Well, over time, we've seen these utility characters become so useful to the point that oftentimes their kits are combined with the traditional Holy Trinity archetypes. The combination of utility abilities into the kits of characters within the Holy Trinity results in dynamic characters that create interesting synergies beyond that of the vanilla healer, tank, and DPS. So using League of Legends as an example again, if you look at any tier list for League, you'll often see characters like Leona, Morgana, and Zyra at the top of the charts for the support role. But these aren't your traditional healers that you typically would think of as supports. They're essentially tanks or mages that are given utility in the form of crowd control, which makes them powerful support characters. No longer is being support about increasing someone's health bar by like 5 pixels, rather it's become more about being disruptive to the enemy and providing buffs that create advantageous situations for your team. But what the heck does this even have to do with Genshin? Well, I think that Genshin takes this model and innovates on the ideas behind it. Instead of utilizing the traditional Holy Trinity, Genshin creates a Holy Trinity of its own. This Trinity consists of the DPS, utility / sub DPS, and the healer. The role of the DPS doesn't change much, as the goal is still to do as much damage as possible and take out enemies as quickly as possible. Examples of these characters are Ganyu, Hu Tao, and Diluc. Then there's the utility / sub DPS role, which is interesting as again, there is no concrete way to define this role. But generally speaking, these are characters that either buff the team, serve as elemental applicators, shield teammates, or generate particles that charge up ultimates. The key here is that the damage these characters do is not usually their defining characteristic. That's not to say they can't do a lot of damage, it's just that their usefulness usually lies in something else about their kit. Some examples of characters that fulfill this role are Albedo, Xingqiu, and Kazuha. Lastly, there's healers like Barbara, Chi-Chi, and Bennett, whose primary role is to top off the HP bars of their teammates. And this is where the issues begin, because I believe that this notion is at the crux of why we get healers that are so underwhelming in Genshin. Over time, the healer and support role has become the most hated role by gamers because oftentimes their only interaction in the game as a healer is with a green bar of pixels we've come to know as the HP bar. Pure healer bots, I'm looking at you Barbara, can be extremely useless as they cannot contribute in any meaningful way to killing enemies or taking down bosses. As a healer main, I can attest to this. When the team is at full health, I find myself sitting around waiting for some action, but as soon as my allies start taking damage, you have to go on full healing mode. However, game designers have recognized this problem, and this is where the utility aspect I mentioned before comes into play. Game designers now try to give healers more utility-based moves because it makes playing the game more fun. It also helps healers contribute to the game in a meaningful manner by allowing them to participate in battles against enemies and bosses, as opposed to sitting on the sidelines and only healing. But this also creates a balancing issue which game designers seem to be extremely fearful of. A prime example of this exact issue would be Seraphine from League of Legends. When she was released, Seraphine had an overloaded and overtuned set of abilities. Essentially, she could heal, snare, taunt, do damage, shield, and speed up her allies. By overloading her kit with so much utility, Riot created an overpowered character that was essentially a one-man team. With Seraphine on your side, you'd pretty much win because she'd not only keep you alive, but also CC your enemies to hell and back while also doing a ton of damage. This obviously was not good for the game and resulted in Riot having to nerf Seraphine to bring her back into the fold. And it's these quote-unquote Seraphine situations that the Genshin game designers are fearful of. By nature, healers are difficult to balance because if not tuned correctly, they can help their teammates steamroll any content. Or like Seraphine, they can steamroll the content by themselves. So oftentimes, game designers opt for the traditional healer bot designs, or they don't give healers utility and try to give them some DPS as a compromise. But not too much DPS because we have to make sure that the true DPS characters stay at the top of the charts. You see the issue here? My problem with this approach is that you either do enough DPS to kill an enemy or you don't. To me at least, it feels like the game designers are trying to find something for healers to do, and the easiest solution is to slap on some lackluster DPS skill onto their healing kit. And honestly, at its core, it's just lazy and uninspired game design. In my opinion, this is what has led to the creation of characters like Chi-Chi and Kokomi. They're not bad healers at all, in fact they're incredible at healing, but what they offer outside of that is laughable. So, if those are healers with bad game design, then what are characters with good design? Well, I'd say the best healers in the game currently are Bennett, Diona, and Jean, and this is because they offer something I've talked about several times in this video, and that is utility. If you look at each of their kits, they're able to offer healing and some sort of utility that helps the team in fights against enemies. Bennett is able to cleanse and provide his team with a significant attack boost. Diona can be used to shield her team and act as a cryo battery, and Jean is able to swirl, cleanse, and shred elemental resistance with the Viridescent Venerer set. At its core, the design of these characters respects the shift in mentality when it comes to healers. Modern healers in gaming aren't solely about topping off the HP bars of their teammates. Good healers in gaming now have to provide something else to be effective. This is why healers like Noelle, Barbara, Chi-Chi, and Kokomi aren't favored in the meta. They're either greedy characters looking for significant field time without the damage of a DPS, or they're completely geared towards healing, essentially being a glorified walking HP potion. And when it comes to a game like Genshin, taking out the enemy as fast as possible is the name of the game. In fact, with how these healers are currently designed, they actually end up prolonging battles, which results in them falling short of the meta. Of course, as we can see in the Abyss Floor 11, MiHoYo is trying to force the issue. But again, I think that's a bad way of fixing the problem. It's essentially throwing the towel and saying, okay, we made healers that weren't well optimized, so now we're gonna force you into using these characters in this one single context. And as a healer main, that's really insulting. Supports and healers have always been the cornerstone to a good team, and they're not boring. If designed correctly, they can be incredibly fun and dynamic. Sure, balancing can be an issue, but game designers shouldn't give up just because balancing is hard. It should motivate them to find new ways to innovate and elevate the playstyle of healers. At the end of the day, Kokomi and the other healers in Genshin aren't the worst characters in gaming history. They're incomplete and were ultimately failed by their game designers. I would argue that in most cases, these healers don't even need a complete overhaul. They just need some sort of utility or secondary purpose added to their kit to bring them into the meta. But with our current track record with Genshin, I doubt we'll see any fixes for these characters anytime soon. So hopefully going forward, MiHoYo sees the issues with their healers and finds ways to make them more useful on teams. And yeah, that's about all of my thoughts about healers in Genshin right now. Again, I want to emphasize that these are my opinions and you're allowed to disagree, just make sure you do so respectfully. I originally had like 10 pages of just random notes about healing in Genshin, but I figured no one would be interested in listening to that. So I did my best to condense everything down and just talk about healers in a very general sense. Hopefully it got the point across, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. It would really help me out, and I also stream on Twitch, so if you have time, please try to check me out there, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!